He teaches classes about, speaking, and also public speaking, and also classes about rhetoric. And just very recently, he published a book about how to watch presidential debates. And I was very excited that it just recently. When did that actually come out?
It came out this summer, but actually I'll stop you there because
Yeah.
Sam has been a very important person in my life. He was a mentor to me and helped me accomplish everything. So I have a copy of it here that I'm going to sign to him right in front of all of you guys right here tonight.
Yeah.
Of my new book, How to Watch Presidential Debates Without Losing It.
And I actually
Making
did
Rhetorical
get a-
Lemonade from Political Lemons. I'm going to sign it to Sam here because I'm really indebted to you, Sam, for all the help you've given me over the years. And now you've got all these great students, you can do the same thing for them.
I hope so. I hope I can help one of you or many of you in the future. Who knows? Thank you, sir. I
There you go.
appreciate it. Good job. To get
Peace
that.
in our time.
Yeah. Let me see what he wrote.
If you can read it.
Oh, that's very nice. You spelled jackass wrong.
Yeah.
It's
That's our little secret
yeah,
joke.
Yeah.
Hey, jackass. Enjoy this blank book.
Yeah, and it's really nice. It's not even all colored yet. So
Yeah,
that's
there's still a few I haven't colored in.
Yeah.
It'll be a good addition to your library of
All right.
coloring books.
So why do I call this jackass here every semester? Because he always gives like the introductory rhetorical, the introduction to rhetoric lecture every semester, and he'll do it next semester if he's still around or I'm still around, and he's done it every year before this, a lot of the years. And the reason why I think he's really good at it, and I also think that if I had to give every lecture, you would get tired of it, right? You'd be like, he told that joke last time. He told that joke 5 minutes ago. And we heard it the first time, it wasn't funny, right? So I'm like trying to spice it up by bringing people that I think are really good at lecturing. And, I put them over to the Statler, I take them to eat at the Statler, I bring out the chef, he's like, nice to see you, Mr. Nelson, he pretends he likes me, right? I should give him a little money behind the scenes, and it's a whole thing. But I really enjoy doing it, partly because I like to see him, he's my friend, right? He went from kind of a person I just met to becoming my lifelong friend, but also because I want you to get a lot out of this class, and you will get a lot out of this class if you learn interesting stuff. And he is an interesting lecturer. And you don't know much about rhetoric. Like, I went over the syllabus, but I didn't really explain what it is. So after you take this class, you'll know what it is. You'll be able to have a conversation with anybody about it, and you will be educated. And my goal as a person that teaches at Cornell University is to help you become educated in things that you don't know very much about. When I asked before, let me just take one more vote. How many people here have taken a rhetoric class before? 0. I require that all my students come completely ignorant of rhetoric. It's hard, but if you had known anything about rhetoric, you would have not been able to take this class. So I feel very lucky. I don't like to have to correct old thoughts. I just want you to start with a blank slate, tabula rasa. So so Steve has been riding on our finest form of transportation, the Cornell campus-to-campus bus. He just got off a little while ago. I then whisked him away to the Statler. He has a room there. And then he went straight to the bar, didn't even check out the room.
Have you gone campus to campus?
Got himself nice and soused. Well, maybe not. Probably, how many drinks did you have?
Enough.
He had enough drinks, and then he's loose and he has no anxiety.
Best TA in the world.
No, most generally a little bit anxious. Not today. And then I took him upstairs where he continued with the same trend, and here he is, fed, ready to go. Let's hear it for Steve Yano.
Thank you, Sam, for the introduction. It's nice to be here. Always like coming to Cornell. Always like giving this talk. We've got a lot to cover, so I'm going to go very fast, but I'm very happy to answer any questions at the end. I hope to give us enough time at the end to answer any and all questions you have, but we've got a lot to cover. We've got about 3,000 years of history to cover, in this class tonight as an introduction to rhetoric, which is a very old thing, but we use this term rhetoric quite a bit. Yeah, but where I want to start with you is your understanding of rhetoric, which is a term you've probably heard before, and to get your thoughts on what you think it means. It's a term that appears in the media. It's a term that's used in politics. Does anybody have an understanding of what this term means? You want to share? I mean, you might have an understanding, you don't want to share it. But if you want to share it, what do you guys think it means? How would you define it? There's no wrong answer, really. It's an old word.
Maybe like how you shape like mood or like the message of something through like using specific words.
Yeah, how you shape the mood or the message through using words. That's an excellent definition. Anybody else? Yeah, in the back there?
I guess the strategies that you use to convey your argument.
Yep, strategy used to convey your argument. Argument's a big word associated with rhetoric. Sometimes we think of rhetoric as persuasion.
How words are used to like influence an audience.
Yeah, how they're used to influence an audience. For good? Or manipulation, maybe?
Temporarily or for good.
Yeah, sometimes, right? A lot of people think of it as manipulation. A lot of times we hear our politicians say things like, you know, we need to stop the rhetoric, we need action. We've heard that a lot in the media. So where does this word come from, and how do we get to this this kind of understanding of rhetoric, and what's the history of that? I'm going to show you a lot of alternative definitions of it that will help you over the course of the semester. Lots of alternative ways to think about it. There's three. The first is thinking of rhetoric as oratory, and that comes to us from the ancient world. So the first part of the lecture, we're going to talk about the ancient world quite a bit and get a sense of how they thought about it. Many scholars would locate the invention of rhetoric in the ancient Western world. It's not necessarily true. Every culture on earth has its own understanding of rhetoric. We don't have time to get into all of that, so we're going to give you the vanilla version of what most scholars would say. Then it comes to the change in the 20th century, which involves this man here who's directly related to every single one of you in here. Directly related to all of you. No, he's not your uncle or great-grandfather or anything like that, but you have a direct relationship with this guy, which we'll get to later on he was one of the most influential people on rhetoric today. And then the way scholars like myself, as a rhetorician, working at St. John's, working in the field, nationally, internationally, how we think about rhetoric today is a study of meaning making. So we have a lot to cover because we're going to start way back when at the Western birth of rhetoric with this person here. The very first definition of rhetoric I'm going to give you is one that is the result of a long, heated fight in an ancient democracy of whether rhetoric is valuable or not. That's this definition here, and this is the most important definition of rhetoric. The art of identifying all available means of persuasion in a given instance. And if you haven't guessed, this comes from the super famous ancient thinker Aristotle. I don't know if you know anything about Aristotle. Maybe you've read him in other classes. Maybe you know something about him. He has a nickname. He's called the first scientist. A lot of people call him the first scientist. Why? Because he thought this weird idea that the way you could know about things is by observing them and writing down your observations. People were like, what, no divination? The gods don't tell you what things are? No. Just look at the thing and write down the changes in the plant over time and you'll learn something. They're like, that's weird. But now that's the basis of all modern science. So he's called the first scientist. Has anybody ever read Aristotle in here? Well, Sam, you don't count. And also, stop lying. No, I'm just kidding.
You forgot to mention what country he was from.
Yeah, he's from Athens.
Okay.
Ancient Athens. We'll talk about ancient Athens in a minute because he's solving a problem that his teacher was deeply immersed in. But if you read Aristotle, he just makes a bunch of lists. And the reason we think that is because he was a teacher. He just had a bunch of lecture notes that survive over the thousands and thousands of years since he taught. And they read like lists. They read like bad clickbait lists. Like on the book, The Plants, it'll be like 12 things to know about plants. Number 7 is really surprising. Click here. You know, that's like bad clickbait. That's the way Aristotle reads, at least to me. But he wrote the very first Western text on rhetoric, which is not really a text, it's more of a list of things, called Rhetoric. Why did he write that? Why was he interested in that? Why did he think it was important to teach his students that? He also had one of the most important students in the world. Does anybody know that story about Aristotle? His student? Who was it?
Alexander the Great.
Alexander the Great. And why was Alexander so great?
He conquered
Yeah, he conquered half the world. And a lot of people say it's because of his teacher, who his father Philip hired to teach him, taught him all these things, including rhetoric, which is how to speak, how to identify all the available means of persuasion in a given instance, especially when you're like conquering people or telling them they should, subjugate themselves to your empire. Kind of important. So where did Aristotle come from? Why did he write this book? Why do you think it was important? Ancient Athens we always think of it as a democracy, but it was a very strange kind of democracy. It was a democracy where if you were born Athenian and you owned property, you could trace your heritage back as Athenian. And if you were a man, then you could participate in politics. You could go to the assembly, you could argue for what you thought should happen, and you could vote. But if you moved to Athens from another Greek state, if you only had one Athenian grandparent, if you didn't own a house, you couldn't participate, no matter how good of a citizen you were. So if you were a foreigner, maybe you were from Sparta, God forbid, or from Thebes, or from Macedonia, or from any of these other Greek states, you could move and live in Athens and have a very successful business, but you could not participate in politics. It's a weird kind of thing for democracy. The other thing is the status of women. Athenian women had all of these rules about them that would remind us maybe of modern day Iran. You can't go out by yourself. You have to have your husband, your older brother, or your father escort you. You can't work. You can't do anything on your own. You have no liberties at all. And we think of this as a democracy, but it has a lot in common with maybe Iranian democracy is the thing I think the most about. In this system, they had laws and they had a court system that's a jury system. But if you're accused of a crime, like if I accuse you of a crime, you're just in the front row, I'm just picking on you, you would have to defend yourself in court. There's no lawyers. And Athens has the death penalty, as we all know, from high school history, right? We all know about the famous execution that we're going to get to in a few minutes. So there were these figures that took advantage of this, who weren't Athenian, that came from other places, and they made a lot of money teaching people how to speak. Here's one of them here, Gorgias. Has anyone ever heard of Gorgias before tonight? Gorgias was the most popular and influential of the figures who were professional speech teachers and rhetoric teachers. They called them the sophists. And the sophists were, this is an old Greek word, it means wise. Sophos means wise. The sophists were professional controversialists. You'd go to them, you'd pay them and say, I've been accused of this crime, can you help me? And Gorgias would say, yeah, say this, say it like this. Cry a little bit when you get to this part. You'll have them in the palm of your hand. Or you want to pass a law that you think is beneficial. He'll help you write that speech and memorize it and practice with you. And this was kind of like what lawyers were in ancient Athens. There were so many different sophists, but there's one guy who really thought the sophists were a big problem. And that's Socrates. You heard of Socrates? No? Okay. I was like, oh, this is the first time ever everyone's like, I've never heard of any Greek.
Socket wrench. So.
That's a new one. That's good. We'll keep that one in the act. But Socrates you've all heard of. What do you guys know about Socrates? Any volunteers? Yeah.
Committed suicide.
He committed suicide. Did he really?
Yeah, I mean, there was a whole book about it.
Yeah, a whole book about it. He committed suicide, but that's the death penalty. They gave him the death penalty. They're like, you have to drink this. And there's like guards in there. They made him drink hemlock, which is a toxic plant, hemlock tea. It puts you to sleep, you never wake up. But why did they make him do that?
He was making fun of the elders.
Yeah, making fun of the elders and making fun of the gods specifically. So ancient Athens, they live at a time where the gods are very real to people. And if you're making fun of Zeus, he's going to show up and destroy the town with lightning. Or he's going to make his brother Poseidon flood the town. Hey, they're making fun of me. Do this. So it's a very serious kind of thing. And Socrates was always telling young people, the gods are kind of an invention to influence people. But he really hated the sophists because the sophists did not value truth the way Socrates saw it. Socrates thought that you come to truth by intense questioning of other people, and intense questioning to where you and I would just spend all evening like on a question of what's beauty, what's really necessary for a good life. And you wouldn't allow me to pursue my argument until you were satisfied with what I was saying. And I wouldn't let you continue unless I was satisfied with what you're saying. Sounds very romantic, it's very good, it takes a lot of time. So people were very annoyed by Socrates because he would hang out in the mall. People are trying to shop. Like, why are you buying those potatoes? Oh, I'm going to make dinner. What does it really mean to make dinner for your family? Go away, Socrates, I'm busy. Right, so he would just kind of hang out like a character, kind of like in, I'm from New York City, like characters down in Times Square that hang out and try to entertain people and annoy people. He was taking it very seriously. And he didn't really profit the way they did. He thought that they didn't teach an art, that they taught people that what was really bad for you was good, through making it sound good. So he was very opposed to rhetoric, which was a term his student created. Plato is the person who gives us the term rhetoric. It's a Greek word. Rhetoros means a public speaker. Rhetoricae in ancient Greek means a thing called speech. And that's a distinction that maybe other people said that, but in the existent papyrus that come from the ancient world that we have, the entire set, Plato is the first person to use this word rhetoricae as a thing. And he said, I don't think it's an art. He makes Socrates say that. Socrates never wrote anything. We get it all from Plato. So if you read a Plato book, you're reading his attempt to drag a sophist. He hated them all. Every single thing Plato wrote is against one of the sophists. They're named for the different sophists. And in each one, Socrates just like schools them. So he's really a huge fan of Socrates. And he wrote all these things to make you think that the sophists were kind of useless. Because his teacher was put to death by democratic Athens. And these guys are able to make millions by giving beautiful speeches and moving people away from truth and reality. That's their argument. But the sophists would say, this is an excellent sophistry. This is so convincing what Socrates is doing. He's really persuading you that he has the truth. He's one of us. Because words and reasons and explanation and persuasion are what make us human. There's no truth outside of being human. It's all our perception. So if someone says, this is an objective truth that is going to be true without us being present or not, that's something we have to perceive. And so the sophists were very much put Socrates and Plato in that camp. In the book Gorgias that Plato wrote, he has Socrates push a couple of issues to Gorgias. And one is, in Athens, they have national medical care. Isn't that nice? Free medical care. A lot of people in this country are like, wouldn't it be nice to have Medicare for all or some kind of national health system, right? In Athens, they had this. So one of the big debates is, who are we going to hire to be the town doctor? So these people would come and speak to the assembly and say, I was trained by Hippocrates, or I was trained by this Italian doctor, whatever they might say. And Socrates said, Gorgias, if one of your students applied to be town doctor, would they get the role? Regardless of whether they studied medicine. And Gorgias is like, yeah, they would. They would be incredibly convincing. He's like, I think that's a problem. I think that's a problem. The other thing is, Gorgias' students push back on Socrates and they say, if you don't think rhetoric is any good, how would you describe it? What arts would you put it alongside? He's like, I think it's kind of like somebody who's a pastry chef versus someone like me who's a nutritionist. The pastry chef makes things delicious that you're not supposed to ever eat, but you want to eat a lot of them. But the nutritionist will say, here's what you really need to eat to be healthy. Also, the other example he uses a personal trainer versus an expert in cosmetics. The rhetorician is the expert in cosmetics, but I'm the personal trainer. And these are the arguments that Plato has Socrates make. But Gorgias thought this was very funny. That book came out in his lifetime. He was like, this is excellent comedy. I think this is well written. And that no one really took it very seriously. Gorgias himself published things, but we lost them all. The Library of Alexandria burned. Those documents are there. So the only things we know about Gorgias' writing come from fragments of other people quoting it. This is why citations are so important, and quoting things in your papers is so important, because your papers might survive the next library fire or dark age, and then that's the only place we'll ever see a quote from this book, because all the copies will be lost. All of Gorgias' stuff is lost. But there's one that was so profound it survived. He would come to Athens and give public performances. He was kind of like a hip-hop star. He would give a concert. But he would read poetry or read drama, and he was not Greek. He was from Syracuse, not the one down the road, but he was Italian. So he had this great accent. Everybody talked about how beautiful it was to hear him speak Greek. It's this really great accent. Think of an actor you like, their accent. You're like, oh, I could hear them say anything. It's just so wonderful. And he would be like, I'm going to read Aristophanes' The Birds, and would like sell out. And Plato and Socrates hated this because he would come in and he'd be reciting this poetry that was rhythmic and metric, kind of like contemporary hip-hop. And people would bob along to it, kind of like contemporary hip-hop. And Plato and Socrates would say, they're not listening to the words. They're agreeing with horrible ideas. They're not being critical. This is dangerous to democracy. This is dangerous to thinking. That's an affront to truth. So Gorgias announces he's going to come to Athens. He's like, I have a brand new mixtape. It's dropping Tuesday. It's called Encomium to Helen. You guys know who Helen was? Helen of Troy. What do you know about Helen?
I think she was talking about one thing, like the Prince of Troy, to Troy, started off as this giant war.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a very good summary. She's married to a Greek king, Menelaus. She meets this guy Paris. They're like, hey, nah. And then we're not really sure, if you look at the Greek, we're not really sure what happened. The verb to use to say Paris takes her away to Troy is the word plagiro, which you're familiar with the English version of this word, right? You're all college students. You've been lectured to. This is the first week of school. Every syllabus you get says, if you do this, you're going to fail. What is it? Plagiarize. What does that mean? What does it mean to plagiarize something? Yeah, take something and make it as your own. This is what Paris did to Helen. He plagiarized her. Isn't that interesting? So we're not sure if she went voluntarily or if
No
he
one in
drugged
this
her.
class does plagiaro.
Plagiaro is the ancient Greek verb form, but plagiarism is the English cognate of that old Greek word. So he plagiarizes her to Troy, starts a war that lasts like 20 years. So in conclusion, no Athenian person is naming their kid Helen. She's horrible. This beautiful woman who can't keep it together, causes a huge war because she just wants to sleep with this foreign guy. Like, she's a bad person. An encomium, it's probably a word you haven't heard, but an encomium is the highest speech of praise, like a eulogy, like a speech for when you're at your a funeral. The highest speech of praise for a eulogy is an encomium. So he's going to give an encomium to Helen. Everyone's like, what? He's like, yeah, and you're going to like it too. You're going to agree with me. So, of course, this sells out immediately. All the scalpers are going crazy. Gorgias comes out to much fanfare. And he lists, you can go read it. You can Google Encomium to Helen. You can read the whole thing because it impressed so many ancient authors. They copied the whole thing into their books. So we have so many copies of it. So impressive. He's like, there are 3 independent reasons why you should support Helen. And I won't get into it now. I don't want to spoil it for you. It's fun to read. But at the end of it is what's most important for us. Oh yeah, this is Plato's cave. Are you familiar with this? Plato. So this is the way Socrates and Plato saw things, was the sophists are creating shadows, and the philosopher brings people out into the light. It's kind of blinding. This is the cave metaphor. So Gorgias gives this talk, and Plato and Socrates are like, oh yeah, he's playing with shadows. Right? But at the end of it, he says, I don't believe anything that I said. I just did this to see if I could convince you of this idea. And everyone's like, what? You said something you didn't believe? He's like, yeah, that's the power of words, the power of rhetoric. And then he defined rhetoric. This is the English translation of it. Speech is a powerful lord that with the smallest and most invisible body accomplishes most godlike works. So it's just my words. But I had all of you believing that Helen is a national hero, when your whole life you were told Helen is a villain. And I did that in a short period of time with just my words. I didn't threaten you. It can banish fear, it can remove grief, and it can instill pleasure and enhance pity. With my words, I can make someone feel bad, sad, mad, scared, or brave. It's the most powerful thing. And then he makes his big comparison of what rhetoric really is. And he uses the word pharmakon, from which we get an English word too. You know the English word? It's cognate with?
Comic-Con?
No.
Farm?
Pharmacy.
Farm?
And what do you get at the pharmacy? All right. This is an ambivalent word in the ancient world because it can mean drug or medicine, which says a lot about ancient medical practices. Drug, medicine. It can also mean poison. So when you're looking at an ancient Greek text, it's like, I don't know how to translate this. But if somebody pharmacons somebody, they might just be like getting high with them, or they might be trying to kill them. You have to like look at the context of it. But he said rhetoric is a pharmakon. Rhetoric is a drug. And like any drug, it can change your perception, it can cure what ails you, and it can kill. And that's the big argument he makes in Encomium to Helen. That's his understanding of it. Very different than Socrates and Plato, who thought it should be banned. In fact, in Republic, Socrates says rhetoric, poetry, and art should be banned from the perfect republic because these manipulate, these make people think fantasies could be true. And they need to really focus on reality.
Well, I have a quick question for everybody. This is my attempt to engage people, right? I recently won an award. I gave it to myself from most engaged professor at Cornell. But have you ever known anyone in your life that could talk anybody into anything, or really good at talking people into anything? And you're like, that person could talk me into things I know aren't good for me, but I'll still do them. Have you ever known anybody like that? No. Yes, this is the part where you answer my question out loud. No. Has anybody known anybody like this? Really persuasive person?
I know somebody like that.
Does anybody know anybody like that? Yeah. And do you feel like it's like a drug almost? It's like, wow, why did I agree to that? Yeah. The rest of you need to get out more. You need to interact with other people, right? Interesting people, because these people, they're out there. There's a lot of.
All right, so Aristotle, who we started with, is Plato's student. And he tries to rectify this divide between the Sophists and the Socratics with his definition, which he says, rhetoric's important because you need to identify all the different ways that people can persuade in any situation because they might try to deceive you. So this is a middle ground definition, but it becomes the root of almost all modern rhetorical study. This is like the first definition you'll learn if you're a rhetoric student, if you do a rhetoric major, if you go to graduate school in rhetoric. A big deal is made about this definition. Very different than Gorgias' definition. And very different than Socrates and Plato, who just don't want you to have a definition of it at all. It's just evil, throw it away. Gorgias says it's like drugs. But we wouldn't want to ban all medicine because there are some drugs that are harmful. We would want to educate people how to dose and take and what drugs are for what. That's what we would want. Is kind of what Aristotle's saying. So for this definition, there's a couple of things to think about with it. That this is rhetoric as a productive art, and rhetoric as a creative act. I'm creating meanings out of my words. I'm creating a reality out of my words. I'm creating a whole world for you to think about in your head from what I'm saying. And I'm doing it here. Any teacher does it. They use rhetoric and they create a world for you to think about. They create stories for you to think about. And they transport you out of this classroom into a different place if they're any good at it. So this definition leads to a structured education in rhetoric, which becomes a big part as we move through Greek history, as we move more towards the end of Greece's superiority into Roman history. It leads to the study of 5 different things, which are called the Canons of Rhetoric. And these come up from time to time. I don't know what rhetoric stuff you'll be reading in here, but if anybody refers to the Canons of Rhetoric, it was the 5 things that make a good persuasive speech or make a good argument according to the ancient authors. Invention. How do I come up with arguments? How do I research? Where do I go? What do I say? What are the things that the audience already believes? How can I use that? How do I make the content of my speech? Arrangement. What order do I want to put it in? Style. What words do I want to use? Do I want to speak in a very crass way, or do I want to speak in a very formal way? Style is thought about not like language, like am I going to speak in a very proper and polite way, or am I going to throw in some humor? Am I going to swear? What's going to work? Delivery is the physicality. How should I stand? How should I gesture? How can I project my voice? How should I pause? What speed should I go? All of these kind of things. And memory, as this t-shirt's kind of making fun of, is what we call the lost canon, which is in a world where writing is not cheap, like all of us are benefit from very inexpensive writing. Well, I don't know, a lot of you have nice MacBooks, so it's not really inexpensive writing. But pen and paper, typing things into a digital document. It's very easy to do. Writing in the ancient world is quite expensive, and it requires a lot of specialized stuff to do. So memorizing your speech is very important because you can't really carry all the stuff you've written on with you. So memorizing it is very important. They had all these mnemonics and ways to memorize hours and hours of speaking. And we lost all those tricks. You can read some of it in the Romans. They have some of it. But most of it has been lost. So now we'll move to Rome, which picks up a lot of their system of rhetoric, their legal system, all of their things. They pick up a lot from the Greeks. And in fact, Roman families that are wealthy, that have some money, they always have their sons study with a Greek rhetoric teacher. So the elite classes of Rome, they often will have the ability to speak Greek. Kind of like if you think about educated people or intellectuals in the U.S. might speak French or something. And that kind of like that's the kind of parallel I want to draw. But everybody who's involved in governance in Rome, in the Roman Republic as it moves into empire, all of these people have a relationship. This is a meme from the Greek speaking. These are the 4 different words for love. You know, Greek has 4 different words for love. Do you know them? This is them in Greek as agape. This is the one that St. Paul uses in the New Testament. Have you ever been to a wedding? They'll read that verse. They're like, but then there's this one love, this unconditional love. That's agape. That's actually the word that is used in the Bible. Eros, from which you get the word erotic. Don't need to explain what kind of love that is. You get that. Philia. There's a city in the United States that's all about this kind of love, which is brotherly love, unless you're on one of their sports teams and you're doing poorly. Then you don't get that brotherly love. Is that Eagles? No, you're not. And then this is Sturge, which is a love you would have for someone much older than you, like a grandparent kind of love, which is different than parental love. And then the Romans have amor, which, we know amorous is a Latin cognate, right? But anyway, this is making fun of Latinists from the perspective of people who like the Greek language, the ancient Greek language. Anyway, classicists make memes too. Fun to know, right? The big philosophy and the big thing is something that I think will hit home for Sam too. The big thing about Roman rhetoric is they saw rhetoric in terms of argument, in terms of opposite side argument, and they thought of rhetoric as a method for uncovering the truth or uncovering knowledge, which is caught up in this phrase, Argumentum and utramque partem, which means two-sided argument. And this was almost like a ideology for them. Two-sided argument is how they saw rhetoric, which is you need to be good at rhetoric so you can present your side of the case as best as possible, even if you might not be right. Because through that exchange, through that debate, through that conflict, the right position will come out. Or if it doesn't, then you can take a position against that and do it again and again and again. They had their entire system based on what now in the legal system, we call our legal system adversarial, right? Everyone is entitled to a defense. Regardless of how terrible you think the person is, they're entitled to a legal defense. So this still exists today in debate education in the United States, which comes from our founding fathers' obsession with the Roman Republic. The founding fathers of the United States wanted to create a republic that was very much like their image of the Roman Republic. Not necessarily the historical reality of it, but what they were getting out of translating Latin documents, texts, and speeches. So we have a lot of our democratic history is not necessarily that closely related to Athens. It's very closely related to Republican Rome. And I've been spending a lot of time looking at the Romans because there's a lot of interesting things happening in their rhetoric as they transition from republic to empire, which I think is somewhat topical for us today, living in the United States. One of the biggest figures that we could look at is Cicero. I don't know if you ever heard of Cicero, Marcus Turlius Cicero, but he was a senator, big figure in Roman law, in Roman governance. He served as senator for a long time, then he served as chief executive, kind of like the president. He served as consul for a long time.
Can I make a quick comment?
Yeah, sure.
Has anybody ever heard of the town Cicero, New York? It's right next to Syracuse. As you're driving to the Syracuse airport, you see Cicero. And there's another little town as well, and it's called Tully. Has anybody ever heard of Tully, New York? Yeah. And then Steve, why don't you explain the significance of Cicero and Tully?
Well, that's his middle name.
No, it's not.
Yeah, Marcus Turellius Cicero.
It's-
So if you go and look at like the letters of like the founding fathers to each other, like Washington, Madison, Jefferson, hip hop superstar Alexander Hamilton, who we're most familiar with now, thanks to Lin-Manuel Miranda, right? They're all signing their letters by different Roman people who they identified with. It's like George Washington always signed his letters Cincinnatus. Do you know about Cincinnatus?
It's also a town around
Yeah,
here.
Cincinnati. We get the town name from Cincinnatus was a very, very powerful general. And he had retired. He was farming. And in the Roman Republic, they had this emergency clause that they could give someone absolute dictator powers if Rome was ever threatened. They could suspend the Republic and give a person dictator powers. But the trick was, they'd be an absolute dictator. There wouldn't be any expiration on it. The Republic would be gone, but it would be to save everybody's life. But then that person could stay there forever, or they could establish an empire.
Yeah.
So this happened. Rome was invaded. It was being destroyed by Carthage or whoever. They had lots of enemies. And they had Cincinnatus come to, they're like, you need to become the dictator. So they put him in power. He abolished the Senate. He abolished free speech, martial law for everyone. And then they went to war, and he destroyed everybody like he does. He's a military guy, hardcore military guy. So they win the war. And they're like, oh, great noble dictator, what should we do next? He's like, by my unquestioning authority, we will have a Senate, and we will have free speech, and we will have elections, and we will have laws that prevent dictators. And then he stepped down once it was all, and he went back to his farm. So this is what George Washington identified with this guy. Right? So all of these Roman figures, you know, they had, they're all talking about Tully. Like Madison and Jefferson are writing about Tully. They're writing about Cicero. So if you ever find that in American history documents where they're like, a republic, the way Tully talks about it, that's their name for Cicero. That's the nickname they give.
So, just to ask a question that maybe some of you know the answer to. So we got all these Greek and Roman names in upstate New York, Syracuse, Ithaca. There's a Romulus not very far away. There's a Cincinnatus not too far away. There's all these Greek and Roman names. There's a Rome, right? Why do we have all these names? And you know, these places were named a long time ago. Why do we have all these names like this in upstate New York? Yes.
Wasn't New York supposed to be New York City was supposed to be the capital? So maybe they wanted to create like a New York.
No. Nice guess, though. The reality is there was a dude in Albany that was the capital. There was a guy in Albany who was a classic scholar. And people used to write in, you know, this is like early 1800s. They'd write in and they're like, we want to call our town or our little village Skunk's Hollow or Drunk Man's Paradise. And they're like, we're not going to have no Drunk Man's Paradise in this beautiful state. You are now Rome. You are now Ithaca. Do you know what Ithaca was called before it became Ithaca? Does anybody know? It was called Sodom. Sodom was like the wickedest city in the Bible because Ithaca was filled with gamblers, saloons, loose women. It was a wicked city. And they're like, instead we're going to name it Ithaca. And why is that an appropriate name for such a place, do you think?
It's rocky here.
Huh?
The king of Ithaca was a guy named Odysseus. You know, there's this movie coming out, Christopher Nolan. Are you excited about that?
Yes.
I'm very excited about it because the Odyssey and the Iliad go kind of hand in hand. So Odysseus is a big character in the Iliad. And then the Odyssey is the story of Odysseus trying to get home to Ithaca, where he's the king. And Ithaca is a rocky, lots of cliffs, lots of waterfalls, lots of hills. It's a really tough place. But Odysseus, like Homer wrote these, but Homer is a lot like Donald Trump. He likes to give everyone little nicknames. So if you go and read the ancient Greek, they strip it out in the translation, but it'll be like swift-footed Achilles, noble Hector, sexy Paris, questionable Helen,
Crooked
right?
Billy.
Yeah, crooked Helen, right? And then there's the silver-tongued Odysseus. So he's very good with words. He can persuade anybody of anything. And many times in the Iliad, Achilles is like, I'm going to take my boats and go home because no one's listening to me, and my mother is a god, by the way. And he's like throwing a little temper tantrum. And Odysseus will be like, I'll talk to him, it'll be cool, and he convinces him to stay. This happens many times. So Odysseus coming, and then he uses his silver tongue to get the heinous crew out of many. They made different movies about this. George Clooney, the movie Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, is the Odyssey. There's lots of different versions of
Yeah,
the
yeah.
story. The
And-
Nolan's should be very interesting to see what he does with it.
It
I
is
think-
interesting, now you know why there's all these weird names around here. And it's just this like weird strip of upstate New York that has these names right around here. Because after a while, they're like, stop it with the Greek and Roman names. We're getting a new guy in the map office, right? And then you got other names.
So if you were a student in ancient Rome, your studies would be all about rhetoric, and it would be in making these two-sided cases about things. That's all you would study, because that's what's most important to the Roman Republic, is being able to argue, and being able to argue in public in front of audiences in a convincing way that you're right. And that's what knowledge was. It's very different than what happens here and at other major universities, which is science is king. The scientific method is how we determine things, and scientific fact is unimpeachable. Well, unless we're talking about vaccines and, but anyway, we're not going to get into all of that. But, the attitude is generally, if science says it's good, it's good. And they wouldn't have had that. They'd say, if you can defend it, it's good. And that was the way they thought. So let's look a little bit at what Cicero's schooling was like. They would do these cases called the Controversia, and this is what all of your assignments would be like. You would read a case like this, and then you would have to choose a side and write the argument of why that side is right. If everyone in the class picked one side, the instructor would say, I'll argue against all of you. This is the most famous one because Cicero did this in school as a teenager, and his answer captured everyone's imagination so much that even in the 15th century, people were still writing about Cicero's answer on this case called Poor Man's Bees. So you can read it while I'm talking here, but this is a typical kind of class this is an exam. And then you would have to get up and deliver your case about why it's right. How would you make the argument for either side? How would that, they don't have the library, they don't have the database, they don't have Google. I don't know how you guys do your research, but theirs would be very different. They would look out into society for their arguments. The word republic is a Latin cognate, res publica, the public thing, the thing that we all share. That would be tradition, religion, culture, language, all of these things. The stories that we tell each other, why we believe we're superior in our country, our government, our people, this kind of thing. So how would they do this? Well, rhetoric for Romans like Cicero would be done of things called, these are all different kinds of arguments, commonplaces. You would look to laws, traditions, morals, ethics, religion, analogies to the way a family ought to be, that your audience would tell you. The history of the Republic. We all know these stories from our own Republic's history that we could use as evidence, and that would be fine evidence for rhetoricians of this era. What distinguishes Roman life from life in the provinces? I hear that all the time, being in New York City. People are like, you don't want to live out there. We have it great here. And these arguments are persuasive to people even today. The commonplaces and the topoi are two that are specific to rhetoric. The commonplaces being places that everybody knows. So if I say to you the National Mall, the Empire State Building, you get an immediate image. You can't stop it. I have control of the images of your mind when I talk like this, right? I'll say Miami, Florida. You get an image, right? Somewhat a place you'd rather be there than here, I imagine, right? Hawaii, Paris.
In fact, if I say, don't think of an elephant, what's the first thing you think of? You can't not think of an elephant.
Yeah. So that's the power of the commonplaces, and these things have, they're worth a lot. Like just to give an example from contemporary that kind of tracks with Rome is, President Trump is trying to take control of the 9/11 museum. He's saying it should be a federal museum, not a New York City museum. And that's a big debate, and people are making arguments about what the 9/11 museum means and why it should be in New York control. So that's something that is very much the way that the Romans would argue. And the topoi are a list of different things that help you make arguments. You can look at the topoi. Cicero wrote one, Aristotle wrote one. You can look that up on Google, and it's things like, which happens faster, which is bigger, which is more important in times of plenty, which is more important in times of scarcity. And it's like a brainstorming exercise that helps you write arguments. There's just a list of these different things. Then they also come up with this idea of stasis theory. Now we all know stasis from science fiction. But stasis theory is where's the part where the two parties can't meet. And this is very useful for composing papers, for composing arguments. is that you can decide where to make your controversy stick. Is it on the level of conjecture, which is facts? I have better and more accurate and more believable facts than the other side, so I'm going to argue with them there. I have the best information about the case, so I'm going to try to argue with that, just win on facts alone. By definition, what does it really mean here? What's the definition of the harm? Did it really cut into this guy's enjoyment? What is enjoyment of his garden? Did the bees really cut into that? What does it mean to be owed money? You can argue it that way. Degree. How significant was this anyway? Was the guy really just kind of like a wuss? He could have enjoyed it. Bees aren't that big of a deal. Or was he allergic and he really couldn't go outside because of all the bees swarming his flowers? What's the degree of the case there? Policy is one for what should the action be? So in this case, it'd be like, how much money does he owe him? Or should he have to pay this other guy for like raising a frivolous lawsuit? Should he have to pay into the treasury? And relevance is, well, is this really the right place to be having this argument in the first place? And you do this one all the time with your friends. If you feel like things are getting out of control, you're like, guys, we're friends. We really should be talking about this. That's a relevance appeal. And you could say it should be in another forum that we do that. So these are things in stasis theory that come out of the ancient Greek world that the Romans really use a lot when they're training their attorneys. And they had professional lawyers, quite a bit. Moving on through Rome, we have this guy. This is a nice Quintilian. He's on the other side of Cicero. Cicero lived in the transition to empire and was considered an enemy of the state, so he was assassinated for speaking out too much against the emperor. Even though he was very good friends with Julius Caesar, he didn't last much beyond that first emperor. Quintilian's way on the other end of empire when it's been hundreds of years, and Quintilian is hired by the emperor to write a book about rhetoric. And he gets a big government grant. He was a rhetoric teacher like me, but he was Spanish. He was from Spain. Hispania is what the Romans called it. And he grew up there. So he came to Rome speaking Latin with an accent, and he faced all the things that immigrants today face, all these biases. So he thought rhetoric would be a good way to kind of ingratiate himself into the Italians, the Latins of Rome. He became a teacher, and he got this big government grant, so he wrote a 14-volume book called Institutes of Oratory, where he said, the definition of rhetoric is a good man speaking well. And this is something that carries into our understanding too, which is someone has to have an ethical core, a moral core, before they can be a good orator. And Cicero believed this a little bit too, but Quintilian really drives it home with the idea of like, they really did believe that people couldn't really be persuasive unless they had some kind of moral certainty, some kind of goodness. And that goes all the way back to Gorgias too, where Socrates asked Gorgias, if someone doesn't know right from wrong, would you still teach them rhetoric? And he thinks it's a ridiculous question. He's like, who wouldn't know that? Socrates is like, you'd be surprised. He's like, well, I guess I would have to teach them that too, and then I could teach them rhetoric. But it's not hard to know what's good and what's bad in terms of a city like Athens. Everybody kind of knows this. So again, it's this external kind of sense of everyone in the community shares a vision of the community, and that's where the good comes from. Very different than our moral theories today. Very different. Going really fast now, because we're almost to the break, and I kind of want to get to the point. Here's St. Augustine looking, very, very Hollywood. I don't know where this picture is from.
He kind of looks like 007.
A little bit. He might be. St. Augustine is one of the early church fathers, and he was a rhetoric teacher as well. And he defined rhetoric as its functions are to teach, please, and move. He was a big advocate of using rhetoric to expand the Catholic Church when it was first opened, to say that instead of telling people that all of their ideas are evil and horrible and God hates them, maybe we should say, well, that's okay, but maybe this. Maybe we should persuade them a little bit more. So he wrote a lot about using rhetoric in religion, and he's somebody who we still look at and still read. Teach, please, and move. And this is still the way you can think of rhetoric today. I think this definition still holds up. It's used to teach people, it's used to make people happy, it's used to make people do things. Final one is getting into the early modern period and the Enlightenment. Francis Bacon, who was a very, very famous philosopher, British philosopher, and he wrote about rhetoric as well. And he said rhetoric is the application of reasons to the imagination for the better moving of the will, which sounds to me like modern day advertising. You present a bunch of reasons to the audience that stimulates their imagination of what could happen, and then they decide to change their course of action and do something else. They either buy your product, they make a plan, they do something different. So it sounds like modern advertising to me.
They call him Sir Francis Bacon, and no connection to the delicious meat. But the deal about him is he's involved in a conspiracy theory. Does anybody know what it is?
Bacon's Rebellion.
No, not Bacon's Rebellion. That was a different Bacon. Yes.
Doesn't he have like buried treasure or something?
No, that's a different Bacon.
He was involved in piracy though.
Oh,
You're on the right track.
Yeah. Anybody know what the big? It's like this would be on, you know, all kinds of social media. Like, have you heard the latest controversy? The controversy is, it's still out there, that he actually wrote a lot of Shakespeare. That Shakespeare didn't really, people have studied Shakespeare, not the majority of people, but people have studied
A
Shakespeare.
few.
And they have
Let's
said,
be conservative.
there's no way that dude William Shakespeare could have written all this stuff. First of all, the amount of it. The second of stuff, he knows stuff that an average dude should not know about royalty and stuff like that. And so, this has to be like somebody that was a higher class person. And so we think, because this dude, Francis Bacon, was way smart and understood rhetoric, probably him.
That's what some people, I don't think it's a popular theory. They also say Christopher Marlowe was really Shakespeare. But my favorite theory comes from Muammar Gaddafi. You guys remember Gaddafi?
Yeah.
Or are you too young? Gaddafi, the dictator of Libya. Right? So Gaddafi wrote an article where he said Shakespeare was actually an Arabic guy from Libya, but the British couldn't pronounce his name. His real name is Sheikh Zafar. I'm
That
not
seems
joking.
even less
He
believable
really
than
wrote
the
this
Bacon
essay.
Theory.
He's like, he was an Arabic guy. He went to England and he mastered English better than the English could, because it's really kind of a dumb language anyway. We all know Arabic is the best language ever made, right? God's language. So Sheikh Zafar, I'm like, are you kidding me?
Gaddafi, he didn't last that
I got
long.
that from my friends who are Arabic scholar, like in Arabic countries.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, this is the craziest thing we've ever read. I was like, I wish I could read it.
I am sticking to the Francis Bacon.
You're not
long
convinced by
Shakespeare.
Sheikh Zafar?
No.
Okay.
I like my.
That's the lecture next week will be the case for Sheikh Zafar.
Yeah.
All right. So any good story has to have a villain. And right now we've all been talking about rhetoric, so great. So now we need the bad guy. So the bad guy comes around in the early modern period, 17th century, 1600s, is a French professor of rhetoric named Peter Ramus. Here's an image of Peter Ramus. Peter Ramus wrote a doctoral dissertation on Quintilian where he said the perfect kind of rhetoric is for rhetoric not to exist. That is, if we have knowledge, truth, that we can get from not having to deliberate, from not having to argue, then we wouldn't need rhetoric at all, because the problems with rhetoric are that people could believe the wrong thing if one speaker is better than the other one. Romans were aware of this. Medievalists are aware of this. The Athenians are aware of this. Everybody's kind of aware of it, but they never saw it as a problem because they felt that everyone, since they're educated in rhetoric, would get that. And they would know that, and they would steel themselves against it. Ramus doesn't have as much confidence in that, so he places rhetoric into the world of just accoutrement, aesthetics, what looks pretty and sounds pretty. And that is the definition of rhetoric that holds from the 1600s all the way up until the 20th century, is that rhetoric is about pretty words and about saying the truth that you get from philosophy or science. I mean, there's no, like, he's coming up at the same time the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment, where science is becoming the thing that we prefer to get our knowledge from. People are changing their ways of knowing. They invent the scientific method. They start doing experiments and things like that. And it's really revolutionizing thought. And it's revolutionizing the university. And so they're not teaching people how to argue and reason and make cases anymore. They're teaching people how to follow the scientific method and believe facts through experimentation.
Yeah, so
And he's right in the middle of all
Yeah.
that.
So he didn't think that rhetoric had any substance. It
No,
was just
no
frill.
substance. It's the wrapping paper on the present. The present's more valuable. Wrapping paper is just like cool.
Yeah.
But you got to tear through all that to get to the real thing.
Them are pretty words, but you're not saying anything worth anything.
Exactly. Yeah. So we get the idea of empty rhetoric, bloviating,
Yeah.
all that stuff from
And
Ramus.
would you explain how this unpopular guy died?
Oh yeah. So he was killed in a famous event in French history called St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre, where he was considered to be part of a religious minority that nobody liked, and his students came into his office when he was grading papers, and they threw him out the window and killed him. He didn't have a first floor office. Sometimes people are like, that wasn't his office. No. He was like in one of these Gothic cathedral buildings.
Yeah, my office is on the 6th floor.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't realize ILR has a 6th
Do you have a
floor.
big enough window?
I have a huge window.
Okay,
The problem
just put it out there.
is I made certain before I moved into it.
Great night,
that
Sam.
It is locked. The window is locked. You cannot open the window, and it's very strong. You're going to have to get a few people.
I think they defenestrated him. They should put him right through the glass. You know that word defenestrate?
Huh?
To throw somebody through a window, defenestrate? It's a great word.
That is a great word, yeah.
Yeah. Sam and I like to trade
defenestrate
weird
me.
words.
You put that in the syllabus.
No defenestration. You will fail the class. So this led to the way rhetoric was taught for most of the time, the 17th, 18th, 19th century. It gets taught in terms of what we call elocution. Elocution here, and actually Sam brought me an elocution book. It's a little fragile. It's from the
You can pass it
19th
around.
century, but maybe we could pass it around.
Yeah,
You can look,
so-
or maybe since we're running short on time, I'll leave it up here. You can look at it in the break. The International Orator and Manual of Elocution. And this is a book directly from this. This comes from a scan from another one of my books where people thought the way you stood actually changed the attitude and the feelings of the audience. So each one of these postures you'd have to memorize. And some of them mean like great concern. It would be like a bad actor, right? Or like wonderment, and you'd be like, or like grief, and you'd have to be like. And this was the way that, I know, it's ridiculous, right? But it still survives today. If you've ever heard of something called neuro-linguistic programming, which is the idea of like subliminal feedback, kind of like Pavlovian, that you could make people think they're doing a good job by like kind of slowly nodding or raising your eyebrows and stuff. You can get more attention, like B.F. Skinner kind of stuff, like behaviorism. But this book, you can look at it. It's kind of fragile. It has a fragile spine. But you can look at it as pictures, and it's like memorizing poetry, so you get the meter right and the rhyme right. Elocution is responsible for this idea of speaking right, which is a way of saying only certain people are allowed to speak. If you're foreign, if you're a woman and you speak assertively and aggressively, that's inappropriate. If you have an accent, that's inappropriate. So it disempowers lots of people and makes only one particular identity of speech, the way it sounds, the right one, the only one worth listening to. This is a picture from 1940s from a speech class where the professor is actually shaping this young woman's mouth in the right way to pronounce things correctly. Can you believe that?
Yes.
Today we call this getting fired and sued. We don't call this teaching, right? We call this Title IX, right? Game over. But this was considered appropriate because if she doesn't form her mouth the right way and say the words the right way, she's inappropriate. But we now think this is inappropriate. Isn't that wild? This is from Penn State, 1940s. That's how long. This is from the 60s, 70s. 1940. So how does this all turn out? Elocution is still kind of with us. People still think of rhetoric this way. But how do we turn all this around? We're coming into the break for part 2. We have this really bad guy. He's taken over the school. Bad news. How are we going to defeat him? We need our own Harry Potter. This guy. He kind of looks like Harry Potter. That's why I made the slide this way. But this guy here at Cornell turns it all around for rhetoric and brings it back to, well, maybe not back to the way it was with the Sophists and the Romans, but brings it back into a more serviceable art. But he did it right here at Cornell University, and we'll find out more about that right after this.
And you are part of the long tradition that can trace back to that guy because you're taking a rhetoric class right now.
He's
The
directly
last one on
connected
the
to you.
Cornell campus, right? But the Cornell School of Rhetoric is what we're going to learn about when you come back. Please take a full 3 minutes. No, please take 10.
10 o'clock it is. All right. So now we're in the second half, where we're going to start in the 20th century. This is a little bit before, we're talking about 1940. This will be in the 1920s. Is this guy, who's an English professor here at Cornell, revitalizes rhetoric. He's a literature professor, and he's interested in something called literary criticism. And he starts to think to himself. His name is Herbert Wichelns. And actually, I have a pretty rare book that was from the 1960s. He worked here a long time. The 1960s, on occasion of his retirement, a book where all of his Ph.D. students wrote essays about how he inspired them. And he trained so many famous rhetoricians, which are what rhetorical scholars are called. I would call myself a rhetorician, somebody who studies rhetoric. It all is thanks to Herb Wichelns and his insight back in the 1920s, where he thought maybe we could analyze speeches in the same way we analyze literature and say something about whether they're good or bad instead of whether we liked them or not. Instead of just mere preference, like I liked that guy's speech, that moved me, or that speech was stupid. Maybe we could have some kind of formal criteria for evaluating speeches. So he writes this essay in 1922 called On the Literary Criticism of Oratory, and where he invents this thing called rhetorical criticism, which is most of what the second half of the lecture is going to be about. Because rhetorical criticism is the art form, is the rhetorical form, is the analytical form that most rhetoric professors engage in today. And it's like literary criticism, but without a lot of rules. It kind of speaks to what rhetoric can be, and mostly about speeches at his time. So he's talking about speeches on the radio or read in the newspaper, which would be around the 1920s. This sets off a big, big, big wave of scholarship. This is a picture of Abraham Lincoln speaking at the Cooper Union, a speech that has been analyzed and analyzed and analyzed again. Lincoln's Cooper Union speech. You can read lots of rhetorical criticism about it. Happened in New York City. What they did was they took Aristotle and then they tried to use Aristotle's guide, which, as you know already as scholars of ancient rhetoric, we've already covered that part, right? You know already that Aristotle's book is about being creative, creating speeches, making speeches, studying how to move people. They take Aristotle's book on rhetoric and they say it's about analyzing what you can do, the limits of speech, and whether you did it right. So it's a real flip from what Aristotle's book was used for and what Aristotle thought he was doing. It's a real inverted flip to say, well, these are the only things you can do. You look at what kind of speech they're giving, the goal of it. Is it deliberative? Is it about changing course, doing a different policy? Is it epideictic? Is it about celebrating someone or something, like an encomium? Or is it forensic, about the past? Did this happen? Did this other thing happen? What do we know that happened? And then talked about Aristotle's modes of proof, which I didn't really cover in Aristotle, but everybody knows these from high school, right? Logos, ethos, pathos. You remember this? Good. Your teachers did a very good job. These are modes of proof, but these are not the only modes of proof Aristotle talks about. But in early rhetorical criticism, this is really all that gets used, which are what Aristotle called the artistic proofs. The proofs, they're based on techne, which is the word for art in ancient Greece. We get the word technology from that word.
Or technique.
Technique as well, yeah. Technical, any of these kind of words, all come from techne. They're all cognate with that. But these are the ones that the speaker creates themselves. They're not the ones that the Romans focused on, like laws, traditions, culture, religion. Those would be considered unartistic by Aristotle. Those are things that people just know and that you can reference. But if you want to be creative and create an argument, you either use logos, which is the ancient Greek word for the word. It's hard to say. Translate this, which means word, or speech. We get the word logic.
Or Legos.
Lego?
Yeah, that's where the name came from.
Oh, okay. Well, I learn something new every day.
Yeah,
Oh, that was a
Lego.
Danish word. Ethos, we get the word ethic, or ethical. And this means credibility. It also means home, like not your house, but your home. So it means your credibility. Are you really somebody who has our best interests at heart? Pathos, we get the word pathetic. This is emotion. So what the early rhetorical criticism was what did they use, and how did they use it to meet the goal of their speech? And now we have an essay. And so they start evaluating speeches this way. To look at, was it effective from a scholarly point of view based on what Aristotle said? This is a very kind of a limiting concept. But these people here at Cornell University create the most powerful, the most well-known, the most broad school of rhetoric. They're called the Neo-Aristotelians. And Cornell is known across the country and globally as the place to study rhetoric.
Back in the day.
Back in the day. Not
now.
anymore.
Not anymore. But at the time, it's interesting, this guy Wichelns kept getting moved around to different departments, right? Like he was in English. Then they had, way back in the day, they had a department of oratory, the department of theater. They kept, like, what are you? You know, like
Yeah.
rhetoric, we don't have that. Right?
He was
They
kind
had
of creating a whole new approach.
tiny bit of time. But then he was like, I'm just going to make this Cornell School of Rhetoric. And he paid a guy to make a sign that said Cornell School of Rhetoric. And he put it outside his office. And then there was one. And it wasn't really recognized by Cornell, but in the rest of the world, they're like, that is where the Cornell School of Rhetoric is. That is where you go to study rhetoric. And lots of famous people came here.
Yeah, we're going to talk about this guy, Edwin Black, who's one of Wilcox's students, really moved rhetorical criticism forward. But before we get to that, if you go and look at old rhetorical criticism papers, 1950s, 60s, 70s, all these are in the database on the library. You can look them up. You'll find they'll talk about the Cornelians, or they'll talk about the Neo-Aristotelians. They're referring to your school.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a cool place that you have in the history of rhetoric, is that this guy just decided, hey, it would be cool if we looked at speeches the way we look at poems and
And it's
analyze
kind of
them.
like in ancient Rome, you know, there's still some things around left over from ancient Rome or ancient Greece. There's still some things left from the Cornell School of Rhetoric, this class. Of course, we're meeting at night without anybody's knowledge, secretly in a nondescript room with no decorations on the door, in the ILR school, which is where it wasn't normally, but this is the last vestige of the very famous Cornell School of Rhetoric, and you are the last rhetoricians to be trained at Cornell. So you are part of the Cornell School of Rhetoric.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah, I'm definitely giving
I'm not. I wasn't trained by anybody at Cornell, but I was trained by people who were trained by Edwin Black. So, like, he taught at Pittsburgh. So there are
Yeah.
people who taught at Pittsburgh. It comes down to me in a way.
Yeah.
But Edwin Black wasn't satisfied with this way of rhetorical criticism. He wanted to go further. So he published this piece in 1970 called The Second Persona. The Second Persona is still very influential to rhetorical critics, and it kind of explains in a nice way what rhetorical criticism is about as a definition of rhetoric. And it's something that, Sam, don't you have them do a rhetorical criticism in this class?
Oh yeah, they have to write it's a big part of their percentage of their grade.
Okay.
How much is it? 90% of your grade or something? Anybody still?
I'm going to say at least 5%. I'm a conservative guy. So at
What,
least 5%.
does anybody have the syllabus with them? What percentage is the essay?
Is this a quiz? Did I inadvertently trigger a quiz? I'm sorry.
25% of your grade is this thing. You better pay attention.
Okay. Wow, that's a lot.
It is a lot.
So this is still done today, the second persona. What Edwin Black is saying the second persona is, it's not enough to just talk about what they tried to do and what their goal was. We have to see if they did it ethically. We have to see if they did it well. Like, what is their vision of the audience? Do they treat the audience like a machine? Do they treat the audience as an object, or do they treat them as human beings? How do they treat the audience when they speak? And that's the theory of the second persona. The second persona, the summary of it before we get into the too many details, just to be clear about what it is Black says that any speech you look at, you can see what the speaker imagines their audience as. Are they dolts? Are they hyper-patriotic? Are they uninformed? What's the model that's being pushed? By the way you put a speech together, you can see how they view the audience. And then you can judge the speaker based on how they view their audience. Do they talk down to them? But more importantly, do they do things like say, I imagine you as people who wouldn't put up with this kind of evil. I imagine you as people who would get together with me and walk down Pennsylvania Avenue to make sure that Mike Pence does the right thing. And then it makes them become something that they weren't ready to be before that rhetorical identity is established. So this is 1970, but I gave you a very contemporary example, which is from Trump's speech from January 6th, a few years ago, which took a bunch of people and made them into this very violent, angry mob. They attacked the Capitol. And in that, they didn't know about this in the commission investigating it. They're looking for legal liability, legal intent. In rhetoric and rhetorical criticism, we don't care about intent. We care about the text and what the text says about the audience. We debate about that. Who's there? Who do they think is there, and how are they treating them? And that's what Black's argument was. It's a powerful argument. People still cite this essay today. In fact, we could probably bring up the latest issue of the Quarterly Journal of Speech from last month and probably find somebody citing Black in there, because it's just such a powerful idea. Let's look at some specifics about what Black says. It might
Can
be
I
helpful.
ask you a quick question?
Yeah, sure.
I never knew the answer to this. It's probably very simple. Why is it called the second persona?
Because the first persona is the speaker. So traditional rhetorical criticism looks at the speaker and says, what words are they using? What evidence are they using? What are they saying? And then it often kind of ignores the audience, treats the audience as flat. Or it also treats the audience as the people, like you're my audience. Traditional rhetoric, you're my audience. The way I speak to you communicates who I imagine you are. And since I'm in a position of power, kind of, you might try to comport yourselves to the attitude that I present to you. You might try to become the audience that I'm trying to make you into. This is a different level of persuasion that goes well beyond reason, logic, evidence, argument, where I try to convince you to be something with reasons. It's I'm trying to convince you to be something because of how I speak about you admirably, how kind I am to you, how I rile you up by saying you're the kind of person who won't put up with X or Y. You're like, yeah, I want to be that kind of person. And that desire becomes kind of a power. So it's a different level of persuasion, a different kind of persuasion. So the second persona is, what is that constructed audience identity that we can dig out of the speech? Does that make sense? Is everybody with me?
Yeah.
This gets pretty complicated because I don't go into it, but you have an essay called the third persona and the fourth persona. And then you have affect theory, which is the modern treatment of it. It goes on and on and on. So here's one of the quotes about this. And Black is talking about right-wing radical politics, are a lot of people, but even in 1970 he's doing it too. And let's unpack this quote a little bit to kind of see what he's getting at. In the discourse of the radical right, as with all discourse, we find enticements not simply to believe something, but to be something. He's moving us from the realm of logical agreement, or agreement on evidence, to our very identities. A different level of persuasion, a different kind of persuasion of who am I, who do I want to be. This speaker sees me as someone who I imagine myself being. And I fantasize about being this person. We are solicited by the discourse to fulfill its blandishments with our very selves. So the speaker is agitating us. We want to become that person. We fill that space. We fill that desire with who we want to be and how we act. And it's this dimension of rhetorical discourse that leads us to moral judgment. So the speaker is responsible for who they craft out of their audience. We can think not just of radical right, but we could think of radical populism as well, which I guess could be right-wing, but a lot of times radical populism isn't thought of that way. But getting people to really throw their bodies into something is what interests Black. And that's not done by saying, oh, you have great evidence. It's done on this other level of the human connection, or this kind of energetic connection of words, that words have this passion of their own. Here's another quote that I think is important. And you guys have access to this essay. It's in the database. You go read it. You could even quote it maybe in your project for Sam. It's still and you could look at other people talking about it in modern day. They might explain it better than me. The critic can see in the auditor implied by a discourse a model of what the rhetor would have his real auditor become. So the audience might not be who they're talking to, but the way they talk to them, they want them to become something. You're going to defend me. You're my soldiers. You're the people of justice. You're the right people. You understand what's at stake. You get it. Everyone else is so stupid. You're the ones who are smart. You came here today. You understand it. This kind of discourse. What the critic can find projected by the discourse is the image of a man. We'd say human today, or person. Sexist language at the time. And though that man may never find actual embodiment, it is still a man that the image is of. This condition makes moral judgment possible. And it is at this point in the process of criticism that can illuminatingly be rendered. We know how to make appraisals of men. So what he's saying is that rhetorical criticism should judge the speaker based on what they assume about their audience and what they're trying to make the audience become in arguments that can't be refuted with facts or logic or reasons. The desire of speech itself, which moves us more into sort of modern day stuff. We're deep in the 20th century now. This guy is the most influential 20th century figure. Wichelns turned things on, but this guy is somebody who can't be avoided.
And I just will say one thing about this guy, and we'll find out who he is. You know how I break up the chapters and I assign a different group of people to give a presentation on all the chapters in the textbook? This guy is responsible for 3 of the chapters. So there's only 10 chapters. So a third of the chapters you're going to learn about, this is the most important one.
So he takes on rhetoric in the 1950s, 1960s, and he's not formally educated. He's somebody who lives in New York City. He writes a lot of essays. It's kind of like living that romantic writer life, you know.
Didn't he have a college degree?
I don't think he did.
I don't think he did either.
Yeah, he's what we call an autodidact, someone who is self-taught. He studied in the New York Public Library. There's a lot of things about him I can tell you. Let's get to this stuff first. Here's a question. Do people hear reasons and simply change their minds? Well, Black says no. Well, Black says there's more going on than that, but Burke is kind of saying, well, maybe people don't just look at facts and reasons. There's something else going on here, deeper. Do people support things they feel like they're a part of already and call it persuasion? This is Kenneth Burke's, his big questions that he leads to his definition of rhetoric, where he talks about rhetoric as identification. Now, this is a very complex idea of what rhetoric is. You might like this definition. You're still thinking about Black's idea of it, but Burke goes a little bit deeper and farther to say that facts and logic and reason don't really factor in at all. It's about what you feel like you're a part of and how the speaker or how the text, whatever it might be, persuades you to think that you're this kind of person. How do you persuade others through your mannerisms, through your daily life? How do you identify with different things? What you wear, how you dress, all of this stuff becomes rhetoric under Kenneth Burke. In fact, the way buildings are built have a rhetoric. The way malls are put together or shops are put together persuade you that you're in a shop. This becomes incredibly diffuse and incredibly deep, really crazy, but let's see if we can figure out what identification is before we get too far into it. Here's his definitions of rhetoric. The realm of the subsidized lie, the scramble, and the realm of cloaked malice. Rhetoric is forever proving opposites, which means that rhetoric never ends. There's always a counterpoint that could be brought up again. It's always a living process that's always going on. And what identification means is that you are always trying to show people that you're a certain kind of person that you imagine. He's getting a lot of this from the ideas of Freud, who's very influential on him. Like Freud has this idea of identification in childhood, where the child will identify with the most powerful member of the family. It doesn't have to be the dad, it's whoever they think is in charge, and they'll want to be that person, but they'll also want to be their own person, which creates the parental injunction. You know, and that comes out in a lot of fights you have as teenagers with your parents. Identification is this idea of you want to be like something, but you can't be it. Right? You know you can't be your parents. You want to be your parents. Realizing that and overcoming it makes you who you are. That's the Freudian theory. Burke takes it and says, we're continuously doing this with ideology, with messaging, with things we see that we like. It's always happening in our lives all the time. So rhetoric is identification. I identify with something. I show you that I'm somebody you can trust, or I'm someone believable, or that, I don't know what it might be. Like, you know, we were having this conversation about Houston and Austin. And through that, you might say, oh, I identify him as one of the people who understands what's good about Austin. If I had had different reasons, you might say, he's a faker, he's not legit. But at the same time, what I'm saying divides me from other identities you could have about me. Does that make sense to everybody? When you have a conversation, this is why when you're first getting to meet somebody, you're like, oh, what bands do you like? What do you like this movie? What do you think of this actor? This kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And rhetorical critics use identification division all the time. We're about to get to a lengthy example of it from a controversy that's going on right now that I find interesting. It's something I would write about if I was writing a paper about it. I have too many projects, too many things. I just wrote a book. I kind of want to take some time off. But there's always interesting rhetoric things to talk about identification division. So we're about to test your ability as a rhetorical critic here in a couple of minutes. But what this means is when I identify, I can't help but divide. Someone will overhear me and say, oh, he's not this, he's not that. It's automatic almost, Burke says. So what does this mean for rhetoric? Well, we always want to be consubstantial with the things that we believe in, that we admire. We want to be so closely related to them that we're almost like palimpsest, like a palimpsest written on top of them, but we're also blurring the image, right? We're right there on top of it, pretty close, but we're not 100% on top of it like a transparency. There's always a little blur. There's always a little remainder. There's always a little bit left. What we like to do as people is we hear people talk, and then we judge their motives. Like Sam says stuff, you're like, oh, he's crazy. Right? Yeah, he's nodding. He agrees. So that would be you judging Sam's motive. This is a new class. You don't know Sam very well. So then you might say, okay, I know what his motives are. What should my attitude be? That I should be very careful and listen, that I shouldn't take him seriously. So this is the way rhetoric works for Burke. We are always looking for motives so that we can create attitudes about someone. And this happens a lot in political speeches, doesn't it? Where somebody, you'll be listening to somebody you divide with, you don't agree with them politically, and you hear them talking, and you're like, they just want blah, 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 they just want power, they don't really want anything good for us. That's the whole thing Burke's talking about how rhetoric works, is that you hear someone talk, you think of them as divided from what you like, they're not consubstantial with what you like, you say their motive for speaking is selfish, So my attitude is going to be to not vote for them or to tell everybody else that they're a jerk. Make sense?
The reality is, it's not bad that you do this. We do it. Everybody
Yeah.
does it. You're human being, right? This
Mhm.
is just what happens. Like if I said to you, like, you're consubstantial with Cornell. You're all
Yeah.
Cornell students, right? And then if I were to describe some person from another school, you would say, well, that's different than a Cornell student. You know.
Well, it's like those great shirts. Maybe they don't make them anymore. But these great shirts, Ithaca is Gorgias.
Yeah. they still
Now that's a
do.
clever consubstantial identification with Ithaca. But then people were like, I have a funnier one. Ithaca is cold.
Yeah.
Making
like the
fun of that initial play on words, right? Ithaca is cold. That was the shirt. And people were like, haha. And then people went to the surrealist identification, the Dadaist identification, and you could buy a shirt that said, Ithaca is your mom. And you saw people wearing those shirts. Does this still happen?
Yeah, yeah.
That was like 20 years ago, but I really thought it was very clever, funny
My
kind
favorite
of.
one was Ithaca is gangsta.
Oh, that's a good. Yeah.
Like
See,
that one.
yeah. So this is almost like another good thing to study as a rhetorician would be the MAGA hats. You know the MAGA hats? You probably don't see a lot of them up here. I don't know. Maybe you
We
do
see
once in a
some.
while. Yeah. But people have made so many funny variants of that. My favorite one is there's one that just says "Make America Great Again," but it's completely made out of tin foil. Like completely made out of aluminum foil, like the crazy people with the foil hats, like so their brain waves don't get red. I thought it was funny. My personal favorite one, maybe some of you music fans, my personal favorite one was "Make Metallica Good Again." I was like, I could buy that one. I could get behind that, you know, stuff. But there's so many variants of it. And then there was one that was a big controversy where there's a woman working at Home Depot who wore one that said America was never great. And it was black. And then she used it to speak to people about America's colonialist and racist history. There's always kind of an interesting way to kind of make the art. So that's the kind of thing Burke's talking about, is people are always, rhetoric is forever proving opposites. So you make a rhetorical intervention, you make an argument like the MAGA hat, and then people will try to divide and consubstantial and push. But that's not the example we're going to be talking about here in a minute. We're talking about a much more important example, vital to all of us. Sydney Sweeney. You guys aware of this controversy? Yes?
I'm not aware of it.
Okay, well Sam's about to learn today. Sydney Sweeney, actress, became very popular from an HBO show called Euphoria. Now she's everywhere. New York Times did a story on Sydney Sweeney fatigue, that people just don't like her because they see her too many times in too many places. She's everywhere.
This is the first time I've seen
But what I want to talk about is this still image, which is part of American Eagle, which is a clothing brand. A lot of you might like American Eagle, a lot of you might hate American Eagle. She did an ad for them, and I don't know if the sound is going to work. So we're gonna try it and see. But we're gonna watch this commercial, and then we're gonna talk about how people argued for American Eagle's motives and Sydney Sweeney's motives and the attitude we should have about them. Have you seen the commercial? Okay, so a lot of you know what I'm talking about. A lot of you were like, All right. Oops, wrong way. I went backwards, guys. Sorry. Okay, so here's the commercial. We're going to watch it. If I can get it to work. It worked earlier today. Does this computer not have internet?
It has sound.
I think maybe it might be blocked or something.
No. We have freedom here at Cornell.
Well, let me see if I can find it.
Or you could just Google it and find and do it off Google.
Oh, I need to see the screen, huh? Yeah, sorry about this. I didn't expect that. It worked earlier today when I was testing it.
That's commercial for ILR. Do not critique that. Third one down.
that's not the right one. None of my videos are going to work, which is sad.
Why are they not gonna work?
I don't know.
Do we have the technological wisdom that can make them work?
Gives you the power of AI to build the website you need.
That's
It's
another
full
one.
business
AI.
functionality.
Rhetoric about AI is a little weird, isn't it?
Customize every element of your website.
AI is another good one to write about, like rhetoric of AI.
In minutes.
Are we that lonely? We gotta make an
Control
invisible
everything
friend.
from the biggest tasks to the finest
When I was a
details.
kid, I had an invisible friend.
Genes
Here
are
we go.
passed down from parents to offspring, often determining traits like hair color, personality, and even eye color. My genes are blue.
Sydney Sweeney has great genes.
Okay, that's the whole ad. It's about 20 seconds long, and it gets played over and over and over and over again. Kind of fun. This ad created a huge amount of media attention about it, some of which you might have seen, which is, oh my gosh. We're not going to go over the next video. This is so bad.
I was feeling the teacher ones were well.
There we go. So this is from NPR. They did a big story about it. Everyone thought this ad was pro-eugenics. Pro-eugenics. Eugenics is the idea of that you should breed people who have good genes together to make better people. That there's some people who probably shouldn't reproduce. And that's the argument people made from this, is that this double play of genes and her being conventionally attractive and having blue eyes is kind of Nazi-like. So lots of people are making this argument. Have you heard people make this argument? People are like, boycott American Eagle, they're eugenicists. They're not, they're promoting this kind of genetic purity kind of take. So here's the statement. This is from AP Newswire. And they chose this because they knew it would be a provocative ad and that it would push buttons. And they said it's about, so they're trying to recover, from the rhetorical critics' point of view, they try to recover and say, it's always about the genes, her story, making that play on words again. This is like written by AP, but in the oral, they play with the different words, the genes and genes. We'll continue to celebrate how everyone wears the AE genes with confidence their way. Great genes look good on everyone. Try to kind of get out of some of the trouble. So these are the kind of things that we look at in rhetoric when we're doing this kind of analysis, and we say, oh, that has a part in it too. Here's Ted Cruz's response. Wow, now the crazy left has come out against beautiful women. So that's his take, is that has nothing to do with eugenics at all. It's just the crazy woke left hates beauty. So I don't know if that has any grounding on it at all. And then I have another video clip here, which, oh, this one might work. This is Doja Cat. Do you know Doja Cat? This is her response.
No.
Sam, you gotta go outside. What's the phrase? Touch grass. You guys like? I like that one. That's a good argument. Right? I say that a lot to people.
Genes are passed down from parents to offspring, often determining traits like hair color, personality, and even eye color. My genes are blue.
So that got a lot of attention because now she's going to the other side of eugenics, which is kind of the inbred kind of argument. Like this is an inbred hick argument. Right, so this is something I would include in there too, of all these different responses. What's interesting about rhetoric is I'm not interested in who's right. And I'm also not interested in what's true. And I'm not interested in the intent. What I'm interested in is where do these identifications come from? Where do these meanings come from? How do people get to them? And how do people respond to them? And what kind of audience do they think is out there? We've got to be safe. We don't hear them. Oh, God. Isn't it funny how in PowerPoint, when you show a video, it always plays twice? Maybe I'm not very good at PowerPoint. Maybe I should be using Canva. This is what my students always tell me. They're like, you got to use Canva. This is too old. So here's the the real result everybody cares about, American Eagle stock soars 20% after this controversy. So in the earnings call, American Eagle said, we're very happy with it. We're not pulling it. We're not firing her. We're not apologizing because we went up 20% in a quarter, and that's amazing, and that's what we thought hiring Sydney Sweeney would do. No apologies. They're like, we're here to make money. It made money. So that's an interesting take, too. Donald Trump was asked his opinion on it. I don't know if this video is going to work. Probably not. But he said, if she's a Republican, I support it. And then he said, you'd be surprised to know who the Republicans are out there. And then he went and got on a plane. He went somewhere. But it's very odd that this reached the president. Like, what's your comment on the Sydney Sweeney jeans controversy? She hasn't said anything about it. She did a follow-up ad with these people, these American Eagle people, which is the one that comes up more now, because this was the reiterated one. So this is some of the stuff I'm going to show later, so it's quite good that it's up here. So here's the follow-up ad that they made.
I'm not here to tell you to buy American Eagle jeans. And I definitely won't say that they're the most comfortable jeans I've ever worn. Or that they make your butt look amazing. Why would I need to do that? But if you said that you want to buy the jeans, I'm not going to stop you. But just so we're clear, this is not me telling you to buy American Eagle jeans.
Sydney Sweeney has great jeans.
You see what I did there, right?
Isn't that strange? What is that? What to make of that? Now here's American Eagle, very aware of the controversy, and they shoot another ad with her in it that's addressing the controversy by not addressing it. In fact, she completely bails out on being the spokesperson. I'm not here to sell you American Eagle jeans. I'm not going to stop you if you want to buy them, but I'm here to do that.
Yeah.
They look great, but I don't care if you buy them or not.
Yeah. This is actually a fallacy of argumentation. People that have had my advocacy class know this one. It's the one I don't want to bring up, and then you bring it up.
Yeah, so this is the device Sam is talking about. Proslepsis, which is where you draw attention to something by pretending to pass it over. A classic rhetorical move that the sophists were the first recorded people to use. Aristotle talks about this. Isn't that crazy that Sydney Sweeney has a jeans ad that uses a sophistic device from ancient Greece? Here it is. You even have the Greek for it up there.
Trump uses it all the time.
Yeah, I'm not saying it, but people are saying it. That's the Trump line, right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying it, people are saying it. People are telling me. It's the greatest in the world. People are telling me. I'm not saying it, people are saying it. They're all saying it. Everybody thinks it's terrible. It's terrible. It's the worst.
Yeah.
Ask anybody.
My favorite is, I don't like to pick on people, but they go, ah.
Oh yeah, when he made fun of the disabled reporter.
But he started off with, I don't want to pick on anyone.
That's maybe not such a great use of this device. What you want to do, one of the more famous uses of this device is in the Apology. Socrates says, I don't need to talk about my military service to Athens. I don't need to talk about my public service to Athens. I don't need to show you my sons or my wife. I don't need to talk about any of that to defend myself in court today. But like by doing that, you do it. But she's really kind of going meta there in kind of a weird way. And then she did another ad. Do we want to watch this one, or are you Sydney Sweeney fatigued?
I am, and I've only seen two.
Yeah, she's everywhere. Watch it? That's what you think, yeah?
Yeah, let's watch it.
We got to find all of these ads now because my PowerPoint sucks.
In fact, let's take the whole class apart. Everybody will write their essay.
She did another ad campaign. Which was happening around the same time.
Okay.
Okay? So,
busy.
Stop and move. Let's reset.
Did we get it?
And what do you make of that? In the light of all this other stuff, this ad has to be read in relation to these other ads, right? There's a lot of information in there, and then it's also intertextual with all the other ads, with the controversy, with what everyone's saying about it. And in this one, she's not, once again, she's like doing a different take. She's not Sydney Sweeney, she's all these other characters. So it's like, I'm an actress, and this is what I do, and I wear these shoes in these different scenes that gives me a different personality. So this would be something we might factor into as well. And then there is a rebuttal to this. Gap put out an ad that we can think of as a rebuttal to the Sydney Sweeney jeans controversy. Did you guys see that ad? Maybe you guys don't pay attention to the jeans market as much as I do.
Is Jimmy Choo a shoe?
Yeah, it's a shoe manufacturer, shoe designer, high fashion scent. The Gap put out this ad of which I think was a pan. Let's see. We'll find it pretty easily. Like, they all know what you're searching for pretty well. So this is thought of as a response to the Sydney Sweeney ad. So that one feels like, it felt like it took an hour to watch that, didn't it? Compared to the other ones. I feel like it just took forever. So you get this real feeling of length, and you get all these different kinds of people, and they're not even really even lip singing their own song. But then also at a different level, it's a band that was constructed on a reality show. They had one big hit, they're selling jeans. All of these things factor into what we would do as a rhetorical criticism on this. And we might also make the argument this is some kind of a rebuttal to what American Eagle is saying about their jeans. These jeans are for everyone, all different body types, all different races. Everything is better in denim. And then whoever made it also is very smart economically, because they don't have to run this ad very often, because there's just a built-in TikTok dance here that millions and millions and millions of people are going to try to learn how to do and put on their TikTok, right? For free. Gap isn't even going to give them a free pair of jeans. They're just going to do it, because that's how TikTok works. It's fascinating, fascinating stuff. So we live in this very complicated rhetorical environment where all these things could be seen interacting with each other, or you can make the argument that they're not interacting with each other. All these things are, oh God, I did the wrong thing. Okay, I think we're done watching videos. How do you guys feel about it? Done watching videos?
I don't care about your milkshake.
Right. All right, so this might be you, I don't know, but this is the kind of stuff that we look at. We're very hell and gone from traditional rhetoric when we're looking at things like commercials. And these commercials become things that people generate an attitude about and say, this is wrong, this is evil, this has hidden messages in it, or this identifies with something like eugenics, which would be the way I would make the argument, say the identification is there. So our attitude should be what? Boycott, complain, communicate, maybe raise awareness, something people like to talk about a lot now. But then we can also have the attitude of the gap and say, let's make a very different, distributed, sort of democratic of the people genes ad. Then we can be American Eagle and say, let's make an ad making fun of the controversy, which is I think what the second one was, where she's like, I'm not telling you to buy these jeans, even though half the commercial is like on her body. You know, it makes me look amazing, but whatever, right? In this kind of acerbic tone, you know? So there's a lot of things to talk about, and that's what rhetorical critics do. Somebody will write about this and publish it. It might not be me, but some rhetorician will write and publish about the Sydney Sweeney controversy, which we can talk about in more detail if you want, unless you're tired of it. All right, let's look at a couple of modern ideas about rhetoric. This is the last thing we'll talk about tonight, so I think we're going to have plenty of time for discussion,
That would be
questions.
good. Yeah.
Space, place, and memory. This is the real distribution of rhetoric past even what I did there looking at television commercials is still considered a bit conservative compared to what people are doing today in rhetoric. They're looking at things like a museum layout as an argument. That curators are making a case for you to look at the art a certain way. That it's not a neutral presentation. Memorials. Here's the Vietnam War Memorial in Washington, D.C. This is making an argument about how you should feel, or making a case, or making some kind of persuasive move, or some kind of appeal that you should look at it in a certain way, or understand that war in a certain way. And as contrast to it, this is the Korean War Memorial, also in Washington, D.C., which is a stark contrast to the way the Vietnam War Memorial is presented. So people have written about all these things. There's many different essays on it that you could look at about how these things are rhetorical. A lot of them will use Kenneth Burke or other theorists to say statues, buildings, and places communicate. This is a big flip from early rhetoric where statues, buildings, and places became the evidence for how you make your arguments. Now they're saying that these are the arguments themselves. Rhetoric of inquiry. This is about how every field of knowledge has its own rhetoric. It's making its own kind of persuasive appeal to you to believe it as fact. Everything from genetic science, which we just covered in depth with the help of Sydney Sweeney, brain science, which these colors are added in by the media after the fact. You have to be a radiologist to understand these brain scans because they just show different degrees of gray. Radiologists are trained in medical school how to read these things, and also it measures blood flow. So if you want to say, oh, this is a Democrat watching Donald Trump, and this is a Republican watching Donald Trump, or this is a student who never used AI in their ILR rhetoric class, and this is one who used ChatGPT for every assignment. We draw conclusions based on that, but it's really just measuring blood flow. And so you have to believe the argument that blood flow is connected to increased brain activity to get any conclusion there. That might be something that scientists debate, but they won't debate it in public. And things like history, which is supposed to be fact-based and everything, even has its own science or its own study of historiography. How do we tell history? How do we do that in a way that's ethical? How do we make sure all these voices are heard? And they have those internal debates all the time. So the rhetoric of inquiry movement is an older movement, but it's rhetoricians who are looking at disciplines like chemistry, accounting, physics, and saying how do they come to agreement on what they're about and what they study. And it changes over time in radical ways. This is interesting to read about. The last one is visual rhetoric, which I was doing a lot of in the example we did with Sydney Sweeney, the Sydney Sweeney ad. We did a lot of visual rhetoric there. We would say, how are they standing? Where does the camera go? What are we looking at? What are we being shown? What are we being forced to look at? What about the sets? What about the color? What about the spacing? All those things come into visual rhetoric. Most famous visual rhetoric stuff is about the Great Depression. This photo taken by Works Progress Administration. Usually it's just zoomed in, and the second kid is kind of cut out, or this kid is cut out. It's zoomed in. It's in every history textbook in America of people in the Dust Bowl. You've probably seen this image before. The rhetoricians will say, let's look at the full image and say, why is it decided to be cropped in certain ways? How does that change the message? How does that change your attitude towards this photo. Might be something there. And then also how photos frame how we act. This is from World War II, the Iwo Jima, famous Iwo Jima photo of the soldiers raising the flag in the Battle of Iwo Jima in World War II in the Pacific Theater. And then September 11th, 2001, these firefighters raising the flag at Ground Zero on September 11th, 2001. This photo was captured by an AP photographer who named it Ground Zero Spirit. And you can see a lot of similarities between this photo and this one. And the way that they convey an attitude or an approach or how we should feel, a connection between these two events, or some kind of admiration or a definition of heroism, or coming together as a country. The flag is in both of them. A lot of people have written about Ground Zero Spirit and about Iwo Jima as well. But there's lots of, you put those two images together, it almost serves as a rhetorical appeal when you put them side by side, I think. All right, so with a lot of technical issues, we've come to the end. 3 different ways to see rhetoric. I hope you have found a different answer to the one maybe you started with. What is rhetoric? It's something we debate all the time. Rhetoricians debate it all the time. We have lots of different ways of thinking about it, and maybe you've found a better answer or a different answer. But the thing is, there's really no clear understanding of it. We're always fighting about it. We're always coming up with new, in scholarship, new ways to think about it. So we've come to the end. I found this picture on my way here today, so I had to. So yeah. So anyway, here's my email. Here's my website. This goes to my YouTube.
And will you
That's it.
send us a copy of this lecture?
Yeah, maybe I'll go back and fix the videos, but yeah.
Yeah, and then Naz can do 2 things. He'll share the slides, and you can post that, but you can also share the actual his video of the lecture. Okay, thanks.
If you want.
Yeah, I do.
But yeah, but now we have plenty of time for questions, comments, anything that's not clear, or anything you want to talk about further.
You must have
Anything at all.
Engage.
Or we can talk about the Sydney Sweeney controversy more,
Yeah.
which I think is kind of interesting, but I'm probably not going to write about it.
I have one thing I want to tell the class that I think they will find interesting. So you're going to write a paper, and you're going to learn all these different ways to do rhetorical analysis. Every week we're going to talk about a different one. Not next week. Next week we have Stephen Kelko coming. He's the archivist for the Kiel Center, and he's going to come and he's like, look at all these cool things you can analyze rhetorically that ILR has, right, or access to. We have the largest archive of management and labor-related things, artifacts in the world. We don't have the largest labor. We have the largest labor and management. So that was kind of clever how you did that, right? Like we have both sides, right? And so anyway, he'll come and talk next week. So it's nice that I was able to get 2 people named Steve.
Oh, yeah, that's
right?
true. Oh,
in
weird.
a row. And then the other thing is, one person did a paper a few years ago that I really liked, and you can do anything. It has to be labor related, right? You can't just be like, Mary Poppins or Sydney Sweeney or whatever her name is. It's got to be related to labor somehow, right? And so, because the class is called the Rhetoric of Labor, and we're in ILR. So, but someone did. I'm going to analyze the building, the architecture of the ILR school, which was super interesting. Just look around this room. Think of all the artisans that had to spend hours and hours designing each cinder block. No, this is the most boring room in the history of boring rooms, right? There's not even an attempt to put any art on the walls, right? The closest thing to art in this room is those little windows that are very weird shaped that hardly let any light in. It would be great if we were being attacked and we had to put our musket out there to shoot back up. But they're not like normal windows, and they're actually kind of depressing because you couldn't even grow a house plant in here, let alone give students normal amount of, and you can't open them. There's no air getting in there, right? So the other thing is these weird coat racks here, which I've never seen a coat on ever, and I've been here 20 years. I've never seen anybody hang a coat on it.
kind of impossible because there's overcrowded rooms with people sitting in front of them. But I guess it's, in theory, it's possible. Why did ILR design a classroom like this? Do they hate people? What were they going for? And the person did an analysis, a rhetorical analysis of the whole building. It was fascinating. Does anybody know, she actually interviewed people that were here when the building was designed, because they asked for like faculty feedback. Are there any ILR majors here? Does anybody know Professor Gold? He's really old, and he was here when they were first designing the building, right? He had some input into it. And what do you think their reasoning was, according to him? Why they made this place so ugly, rhetorically? Yeah.
Was it cheap? Like the most inexpensive way to build a
I
building?
think that might be the real reason, but actually, I thought that a long time too, but it was actually quite expensive at the time to make this evidence. Yeah,
I've heard it was like to show the plight of workers.
it was. They didn't want to make it all fancy. We're in an Ivy League tower here, we have like amazing mahogany and all this other stuff, oriental rugs, you know, all this. When like, and now let's talk about the farm workers. So they said we need to make it so that if some actual workers were to show up, that they would not feel out of place and that we were like looking down upon them. Is that weird or what? Do you know what I'm saying? But they're still an Ivy League institution. So what did they do to, because they want that too. So what did they do to make it look like, but it's cool, but it's fancy, right? Reading your paper, I learned this. What do you think they did? There's one part of ILR that doesn't look like this. Yeah.
The faculty room?
Well, that's new. Yeah, so that's more recent, but when they first made the building, way back when. Anybody want to guess? If you look at King Shaw Hall, there's like this fake, like thing from the 1800s. It's fake. Like this, like cupola on the top. Like from a building that would be built in the 1800s. And they're like, so we're old, like Ivy League. We were founded in 1945. Right? And so it's like they are trying to have their cake and eat it too. But I found that super interesting as it related to labor, right? And what the connection was for labor. And it was a good one because it was studying ILR, which is teaching labor, right? And a little bit about like teaching labor and education and being an Ivy League school. Very interesting paper. Right. Do you find that interesting, Steve?
I've heard it before.
Oh, I've heard that before too. Okay.
No, but you can do rhetoric of people do rhetoric of architecture stuff all the time. You can do that.
Yeah. So why don't you ask Steve some questions about his work, what he finds interesting?
Or you don't have to. That's
Why
what I
don't you
need.
ask
Really.
a question of some sort,
AMA?
out loud? That's called participation.
How'd you pick to study this?
How did I pick what?
Like to study this area?
Oh, so when I was in high school, I got interested in high school debate. I had a teacher who really encouraged me to do high school debating. And then from there, I got very interested in language and persuasion. And then from there, I went to Texas A&M, and I met really great professors there in the communication department who really turned me on to rhetoric, some really brilliant people. And I took rhetoric classes from them. I took a class called, I took like a history of rhetoric class, and I took rhetoric of film and television with a guy named Rick Rigsby, who was amazing, really dynamic professor. I thought he was very, really interesting. I wanted to talk to him all the time. So that's how I got kind of into it. But when I was an undergrad, I did a history degree because I was obsessed with the Napoleonic era, and I wanted to become an expert on Napoleon, like a military historian. That's what I wanted to do. But I could never get into, have you ever had this problem where there's like a class you really need, you could never get into it? This happened to me at Texas A&M, but nobody cared. Because it was like a different era where they didn't need to make you all happy to make sure you stay so the university could stay open, which is the way it is now.
That's not
they just didn't,
different here at Cornell.
They didn't care. They were just like, you're on your own. So I could never get into French, and I thought that was kind of important. If I wanted to be an expert in Napoleon, I would need to know that. So I was like, I'll just take German and graduate and do something else. So I have a history degree as my undergrad degree, but my minor was in this. But then after that, I met Sam, and Sam was like, hey, you're pretty great. Why don't you go get a master's degree at Syracuse? So I was like, okay. So I did that. We were working together at the University of Rochester at that time. 24 years ago.
Yeah, and I knew the people at Syracuse, so I like introduced them, they loved him. And then he went from there to get his Ph.D., and now he teaches. He's a tenured professor at St. John's. He lives on, anybody here from Long Island?
Oh yeah, there's a few of them. Yeah.
He lives on Long Island.
I live in Suffolk County, on the North Shore. But to this question, the reason I think it's so interesting to study is in a lot of other things, like in history, you're kind of stuck studying your expertise. In rhetoric, you can jump around. So like I write papers on a lot of different things.
What are some things you've written about that are interesting?
Well, I think they're all interesting. I don't know what you would think, but I can give you that link. I have a list of everything I've written. But mostly I write about our conception and assumptions about what it is when we teach people how to debate. What are we teaching them? And there's a lot of odd views about what argument and debate are today. And a lot of them come from YouTube. So they're capitalist, for profit, media entertainment, but they might be doing irreparable damage to things. One of them is this thing called Jubilee. 50 atheists versus 1 Christian. A black feminist versus 50 MAGAs. And it's the weirdest. Have you ever seen this? Jordan Peterson versus a bunch of people who want to make fun of him. I didn't understand that video. But this is doing a lot of harm to people's understanding of debate and argument because of the identification. Like I like Burke a lot. The identification is this is something that's only for entertainment. And if you only think of argument and debate as for entertainment, then you don't think of it as something useful or vital for the practice of democracy. There might be a reason why nobody is encouraging anybody to talk to each other in this way. Well, you can't change people's minds. Like everything anti-rhetorical, you can't change people's minds. People are as they are. It is what it is. I'm not talking to any MAGAs. I'm not talking to any woke snowflakes. There's no hope for these people. These aren't democratic attitudes, but it's also the erosion of rhetoric, which is the ultimate tool for establishing a republic or democracy, something like that. So who wins? Well, the plutocrats win. Plutocracy is government by the wealthy. This is the kind of government I think we have. Government by the wealthy. The wealthy people make all the decisions. And we look to them for guidance, whether they're elected or not. And I think if we want to return, demos isn't, we don't have factocracy or scienceocracy or anything, logicocracy. Demos is the ancient Greek word for people. We have to listen to people even if we think they're stupid. That's how it works, right? So that's kind of my that's my very quick political statement for you. But I think it's interesting to look at how debate is sidelined. You know, like you guys know this guy, he did one of these Jubilee things, Mehdi Hasan, the famous journalist, Mehdi Hasan, you know this guy? So he wrote a book called How to Argue and Win Every Argument, or Win Every Argument. And I'm like, oh, I can't wait to rip this book apart. So I'm taking notes on it, ha ha ha, and then I'm reading it and I was like, this sounds a lot like my ideas. And then I turn the page and he's like, Dr. Stephen Yano from St. John's. And I'm like, well, now I can't. Now Mehdi's my friend, he cited me. That's like gold to a professor. I'm like, I'm showing everybody. I'm like, Mehdi Hassan's read my work. This is great. But then I watched him on Jubilee. I was like, well, he read it, but he didn't retain it. So, you know, no help for the journalists, I don't think. They're kind of do their own thing. But that's one model. And then you have all these debate bros that I call, like Steven Crowder, Charlie Kirk, Destiny. Who are these people? What rock did they slither out for? Who are they? What are they doing? And they just don't, they don't have any training. It's like, imagine if you were a chemist and you turn on YouTube on the computer and you see all these people playing with incredibly dangerous chemicals. They're like, ha 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 ha, I'm so good at chemistry. You'd be like horrified. Or like, oh, guns, how do they work? Let's load it and fire it at different people. Like that's how it looks to a rhetorician. It's horrible, right? Somebody had their hand up before I went on a rant.
What do you think, which definition do you think is most applicable to how rhetoric is today, with social media and more access to education and everything?
Yeah. More access to education? I don't know. I think
Well, compared to
that's a jump.
1,000 years ago.
I guess we have more access, but is it more applicable? I think social media is super interesting. There's lots of people working on social media, and there's lots of people writing about memes. I don't write it. I love memes. I think they're just so brilliant. But the research on memes is very good in rhetoric. People writing about that. Eric Jenkins, Davy Johnson. These are some scholars who've written about memes. I think are very good. The only thing I've written about in terms of this is I wrote about video games. I wrote about with a co-author of mine who's a game studies scholar, who's a friend of mine. We wrote an essay about this term tryhard. Like, stop being a tryhard. And we were like, where does this come from? What's the origin of this term, and how does it get distributed, and how has it changed over time? That's what interests me. And it turns out tryhard has these racist origins from Twitch. It's a racist thing. It started off nice, and then it got co-opted by racists, and then now it's like, you know, you can't quite, can you ever really wash that off? If a term is racist, can it ever be washed off to be where you could use it again? I don't know, that's kind of the question of it. Our essay went in a totally different way. But I think social media is interesting because we're doing more rhetoric more often for larger audiences than any of these ancient people could imagine. Like if you're doing TikTok, you're doing rhetoric, you're speaking, you're doing some kind of performance for possibly millions and millions of people, maybe even more than that. Have we really come to terms with what that is? This is like some kind of a globalized rhetorical platform. It is really fascinating. Instagram has had a lot of stuff written about it, about how terrible it is. But TikTok is terrible in a different way. Instagram made the ideal the standard with body image, things like that. All this has been well documented. But TikTok is like a different level of engagement where it's judging what you like while you're still figuring out that you're liking it. So instead of waiting for you to like something or anything, it's tracking how many seconds you're on a video, and it's making determinations of the 5th video you're going to see when you're 10 seconds into a 1-minute video because you haven't moved on. And if you swipe through something after a second or two, which we all do, I mean, I watch TikTok too. I think it's great. It's just so weird. I try to make my algorithm as weird as possible. So just to see what it will do. So my current experiment is I've followed every university dining service account I can find. I've run out. They're not recommending the library to me. No. I don't want libraries from these small schools in Michigan. I want dining services because I want to see what they're doing. And of course, they're all doing what you'd expect, the Pink Pantheress meme, right? You know, my name is Pink, and it's really nice to meet you. You recommended to me by some people. Ooh, we all know this meme, right? And they're all doing that with their dining services employees, and I'm like, whose idea was this? Like, why? Why did you think this is meaningful? It's meaningful, clearly, but why did you think this? And where am I getting this meaning from to where I'm like, that's cute, you know? Weird, right?
I was wondering, do you think that like the study of rhetoric and like the way you're studying, especially on TikTok, and it just kind of when you start talking about the origins of the word tryhard, reminds me of like a lot of linguistics content about like the origins of words and like etymology of words. I'm just wondering how often that comes up when you're studying rhetoric.
Yeah, it really, you know, in rhetoric you have ultimate freedom for your research, which makes it great. So a lot of times people come to me as a professor, they're like, I want to go to law school. And I'm like, well, do you want to practice law? And they're like, I want to be a millionaire. I'm like, that's not what I'm asked. I want to make a lot of money. And then I'm like, well, what do you imagine law practice is like? And they describe it to me, and I say, oh, you want to be an actor on a TV show about lawyers, because that's not really what they do. And I usually, 9 of the 10 people who come to me who want to go to law school actually are interested in studying the law from another perspective. Linguistic, rhetorical, or otherwise. They don't actually want to practice law. Like they're much, much more interested in like writing poetry about water than being a plumber. That's the difference. Like lawyer's like a plumber. If you want to write poetry and think about water in interesting new ways and our relationship to it through narrative or otherwise, you want to be a rhetorician. So when something like this comes up like linguistics, it's really up to the scholar how much they want to include or not. I have a lot of friends who do linguistic stuff. I read a lot of linguists, but some of the stuff I can't read. It's like too intense. The difference between a linguist and a rhetorician, painted broadly, is a linguist is looking for mechanical relationships between different languages as structure. Where do they come from? What are the roots? How do they share these things? And how do word origins, etymology, and these things come together? But also there's a lot of philosophers who do etymology too, like Nietzsche, the most famous, based all of his philosophy on word origins. I don't know, I've read some popular work by linguists and used some of that. The most would be this book called The Argument Culture, Deborah Tannen. You know this book, Sam? Yeah, I use that book quite a bit in this like pursuit of like, How do people imagine argument? Why do people think argument is such a bad word?
George Lakoff.
George Lakoff, another linguist, yeah. Don't Think of an Elephant, that famous book. He wrote another one not too long ago. I can't remember the name of it.
So,
Well, they write popular press books, but it's a good question. I think there's a lot of crossover. In other fields, there's not a lot of this encouragement to crossover, but in rhetoric, we're like omnivorous. We go everywhere. And we study whatever interests us.
We're out of time, Steve, but
Okay.
let's hear it for Professor Allen.